So, good afternoon, everyone. We'd like to thank you for taking the time out to come to this briefing. We're going to take you through a few risk factors for people getting involved in extremism, so you can spot this when it's happening in your own community, and maybe, stage an intervention to prevent people getting involved in the wrong thing.
Yeah, so extremism is defined as a worldview that encourages violence to influence political change. So this can also include things like surveilling people to collect metadata and then using that to figure out who to kill. So this is one of the people who decides who to kill based on metadata. She talks about how she uses F3A methodology to conduct analysis on raw and fused human to SIGINT and comment, helping to create 125 targeting support packets and then nominating them to the joint priority effects list for kinetic targeting. So she's using all of this intercepted communications, information possibly gained under duress from torture, and various metadata to determine who to kill and capture.
Yeah, and thanks to the information released by Edward Snowden, we have more insight into how far this extremism reaches. This is the Joint Prioritized Effects List, or a redacted version of it. We know from the Snowden documents that the UK has been involved in putting names on the Joint Prioritized Effects List in Yemen and places which were not admitted to Parliament before that reporting was done. And here, other reporting has revealed that NSA operations staged in Germany have also been involved in the interception of information that was used for putting people on the kill list as well.
Yeah. So this is a list of people used to kill and capture. So what are who can become a violent extremist like this? What are the factors that lead someone down to the path of using extremism in this way? There are these different engagement factors, things like feelings of grievance and injustice, feeling under threat, a need for identity, meaning, and belonging, a desire for status, desire for excitement and adventure, a need to dominate and control others. Things like that are what lead people to become.
So these are worth looking out for, and I think maybe we can take you through a few of them one by one. We don't have time to go through all of them, but we'll do a few of them. So let's look at example of people feeling under threat, first of all. Okay, this is a presentation that the City of London Police and the City of London Corporation have been using to brief nursery school teachers and primary school teachers in London. Just in case the images aren't clear, I'll just explain to you what they are. This is Occupy London outside St. Paul's, which was there for late 2011 through 2012. The image in the middle is the IRA bombing of Docklands, which happened in 1996. There was some loss of life there. And on the far side, that's the bus bombing in Tavistock Square on 7/7, the first suicide bombings in London. 13 people died there. Now, I think it's worth taking just a moment to appreciate the worldview that created this slide. I mean, because obviously on a immediate level, it's incredibly offensive, right? But I like to take a moment to think, what's the state of mind which would actually see these things as equivalent? I mean, what must it be like to be living in a world where, yeah, sure, Occupy London and the 7/7 bombings are sort of similar and equivalent. What must it be like to be that afraid in a completely sort of non-discriminatory basis? There's a few more of these. Other things that the City of London Police thinks are threats: left-wing extremism, right-wing extremism, as it says. Groups involved in animal rights and politics, just politics generally. There you go, local issues, Occupy, student protests, urban explorers also seen as a threat. This is quite, I know it's difficult to get yourself into the mindset of an extremist like this, but just think what it must be like to, be as afraid of urban explorers as you are bus bombers. That's a real pervasive state of fear, and it's one of the things to look out for.
And if urban explorers and Occupy are considered dangerous extremists, then the intelligence community should be as well. They engage in much more violent extremism than those groups on average. So last year, some of you might remember that I released a database called IC Watch. At that point, it was 27,000. Now it's over 100,000 people in the intelligence community. It's resumes that we collected from LinkedIn and other public websites. So when we released this at Republica, we weren't really sure what to expect, and in the weeks afterwards, and still occasionally, we started receiving various threats from people in the intelligence community who felt very much threatened by us just reposting their information that they had published online on the public internet themselves already. So these range from everything from people saying we'd rather you take it down to all the way up to death threats, but most of them are something like this. Something in the middle where they're saying, you are now personally enabling and assisting terror organizations such as Islamic State in Iraq and Syria that pose a very real and immediate threat to me. This quote is from someone who is in the Army Reserves and lives in Indiana, and has not been deployed, is not in any way in any sort of dangerous environment as far as I can tell, and posted this information about their work online themselves. And it was still up when they sent me this email on their LinkedIn profile. So it's very interesting that people feel threatened by their own information being posted online by someone else. And they feel threatened not by me posting it, but they feel threatened by some arbitrary terrorist organization that I have absolutely no relation to. So there is a very, very high level of feeling under threat.
So if feeling under threat looks like a possible engagement, in fact, for getting involved in the intelligence community, so does a need to dominate and control others. Lots of suggestive evidence about this in the Snowden documents. These were a few slides that came out of GCHQ's Joint Threat Research Intelligence Group, which is the information operations bit of GCHQ, the bit that tries to manipulate information to control and influence people. So you can have a look at some of their pop psychology here. Question, can I game this? Looking at dynamics within groups in ways that you could try and manipulate them and pull them apart. And this NSA slide, which you might have seen before, a need to control and dominate. Know it all, collect it all, process it all, exploit it all. A need to control and dominate.
Yeah, and there seems to be this obsession with information dominance. This is a picture of Infodom. It's the Navy's Center for Information Dominance, which is a center for training people in information warfare. And there are a lot of centers for information dominance in the intelligence community. SAIC also has a Center for Information Dominance, which is focused more on data collection. And there are about 1,000 people in the IC Watch data that are talking about how they are skilled in information dominance and various things like that. So very obsessed with using information to control other people.
So another engagement factor, which is cited in the slide we started off with, is opportunistic involvement. And here's a sign of opportunistic involvement, what the NSA calls fourth-party opportunities, which is taking advantage of operations mounted by others and taking the information that they collect, what they repurposing and rather charmingly call victim stealing stroke sharing. Victim sharing sounds much so much nicer than victim stealing, doesn't it? Oh, okay, and then we'll move on to another engagement factor, which is involvement of friends and family, so sort of peer pressure. And some families are more high pressure than others, right? So this is what the NSA says about their third-party relationships with sort of extended members of the intelligence gathering family. NSA might be willing to share advanced techniques with a proven and reliable partner in return for that partner's willingness to do something politically risky. A demanding relationship. And for a variety of reasons, our intelligence relationships are rarely disrupted by foreign political perturbations. Few senior officials outside of defense intelligence apparatuses are witting to any significant connection to the US NSA. There's a relationship in which they're expecting their partners to do politically risky things in the knowledge that their partners are working under a shield of secrecy and maybe not informing all members of their governments even, never mind the public. And so as an example of how this kind of relationship works, the Guardian reported on some GCHQ documents which play explicit heed to these kind of pressures where, GCHQ is receiving a lot of American money and must pull its weight and be seen to pull its weight, and that, the pressure that they might not be doing enough to satisfy their NSA partners. And looking at Germany, according to NSA documentation, officials within the BND, with a need to impress their American partners, were working with the German government to relax the interpretation of privacy laws over the long term. And GCHQ in other documents took some credit for this as well. So, influence of friends and family. Okay, and moving on to desire for status. If you look through the Snowden documents, there are lots of references to, this is one guy who says, with the luxury of working in a community, it's some of the most brightest, smartest, most cutting-edge people around, and if you want to see the cool new things, then NSA is the place to find it. This is a GCHQ document where they're telling agents you're in a privileged position, you're in an enviable position, you have access to a lot of sensitive data, have fun with it and make the most of it. So desire for status.
And sometimes the desire for status illustrates itself in bizarre ways. This is a trophy that's given out to people in NSA tailored access operations, the NSA's hacking group, when they retire. It's this dragon trophy, and it says on it, it's just Nmap, and it has in Latin, beware the dragon, written under it, and it seems to be given to people in this particular part of Tau whenever they retire. And I just found it on someone in IT Watch's Facebook profile. It was his profile picture, clearly very proud of it. I don't know how big it is. Yeah. So what does Spook focus on? So I mentioned earlier this database that I released earlier, and it's 100,000 people talking about details of what they do for work and explaining it to potential employers just on the public internet. And this is really amazing because the intelligence community is so secretive that this is one of the few ways that we can do actual research on who's involved, what they're doing, and look at some of the broader trends. So I've done a lot lately, or I've done a lot before on looking at some of the lower scale, looking at individual people. So I decided for this talk to try to do analysis of the broader trends, how things changed over time in the intelligence community, and I actually added the backend so that it's very easy for anyone to can do even some basic programming to add new trends and to try new trends, and we can probably make it more accessible if people are interested. There are some limitations of this that I want to note in advance. The data that we collected is not a perfect representative data set. It's focused on, most of our search terms are in English. It's focused mostly on the American intelligence community. Obviously, the search terms that we ran shape the results that we get, because when we're collecting this data, we're, say, searching for code words mentioned in the Snowden documents, or known intelligence contractors, or other terms that we found in other resumes that seem interesting, and we'll get the results that we get from those. But it's large enough that there are some interesting broader trends we can spot. The other thing is that sometimes there's some external factors that affect the data, like LinkedIn was launched in 2003, so generally there is a peak in most terms that starts to go up after 2003, just because people are posting more about their post-LinkedIn work than their pre-LinkedIn work, generally. And sometimes they add fields to profiles. Like actually when they add languages or skills, it makes it harder to track those things. A little bit harder after that point, because at least in a time correlated way, because if you want to see when someone is speaking a certain language as part of their job in a particular year, you can only look at the job description. It's not very interesting technical details, but it affects how some of the trends work. So one thing we did was we looked at some of the top languages that occur in this data. English is predictably fairly high, where people are mostly English speakers. Arabic is also predictably the second most spoken language in the data. For a while it was by a long shot, but now it's going further down. Then there's some other obvious languages that match intelligence priorities: Russian, Pashto, Urdu, Chinese, Farsi, and also just common languages that a lot of people in the American intelligence community speak, like German and Spanish, and French. It's just common languages for people to learn. One interesting thing in this graph, probably the most interesting part, is the relative frequency of languages. And we can see the popularity of Russian versus Arabic. Russian was far more popular than Arabic until 2001, at which point Arabic suddenly became much more popular, and now it's going back down and is at about the same level as Russian. So we can see interesting trends of when people start to be paranoid about particular groups or regions or countries, and then suddenly they start recruiting more and more people that speak that language. We did the same thing with countries in IC Watch and see similar trends. The US is obviously fairly high up, though it's not the top. It's that line in the middle. The line that's the highest first, the brown or purple one, is Iraq, and then after that, the one that peaks is Afghanistan, which actually follows the same pattern of when the US was at war in those countries. So that's quite interesting to see. There's a bit less focus on countries like China than I would expect, so that's also quite interesting. And then there's some obvious ones like Mexico and Canada. People in the American intelligence community are probably going to be talking about just because they happen to be neighboring countries. We also looked at the Snowden code words that were mentioned in these documents. So this is the overall number of people mentioning Snowden code words in the documents over time. It goes up, I think it peaks in 2009 and then goes back down, but that could just be because there are new code words that we don't know about, so people are mentioning them less in their resumes. It's hard to tell exactly why. And we can see also which code words are mentioned in the documents. The ones that people tend to mention in their resumes are typically tools or databases. They're not like programs or initiatives, because those tend to be more secretive and less relevant to future employers, but they're like, I know how to use this tool to intercept people's communications. I know how to use this database of telephone metadata. Most of these we have a pretty good idea of what they are. There's one, OneRoof. That's one of the most popular ones that say some sort of database, but we don't actually know what it is, but it's one of the most commonly mentioned, so it'd be nice to figure out what that is at some point. Yeah, and there's just a variety of things there.
SMS database comes up quite a lot in there.
Yeah, there's information sharing systems, IC Reach. There's cell phone, telephone metadata databases, internet metadata databases. Enquiry is the NSA search system for text documents. So a variety of things. So the other thing to note is that by observing this data in a public way, we are changing the data. Several months ago, I guess in January and December, we recollected all of the resumes that people had initially, that were in the original version of IC Watch. And of those 27,000, 1,030 people had deleted their resumes, and 664 had made their resumes private. Possibly just because they wanted to do it, possibly because they saw that what we were doing and didn't want their data collected in the future. Some people also changed their resumes, so we added this change tracking functionality, and some people changed them to seem more benign, like this person changed intercepted and translated target nation communications to simply process target nation communications. And sometimes they try to change their profiles in ways that make it harder to collect that data in the future. So the same person went through, and intelligence analysis was the term that had caused them to show up in the original database. So they removed the word intelligence from every single entry in their resume, which didn't really work for hiding their resume in this case, because we already have their profile URL, but it would make it, if someone did that before we collected it, it would make it harder to get that data in the future at some point. So aside from these engagement factors and the broader trends, what sorts of challenges do spooks face, and what are some of the major pitfalls and issues that they're responding to?
I mean, we can identify some of these challenges really easily because if you look through the Snowden documents, they talk about it all the time. Obviously, there's lots of criticism of the intelligence community for this, looking at the whole haystack instead of like targeting things properly. And this too much data complaint actually comes up in the NSA documents and the Snowden documents all the time. There's just masses and masses and masses of references. In fact, it's so well known as a problem that even like the Canadians even refer to their haystack and have slides with pictures of haystacks on it.
Yeah, I think the second challenge, which they talk about quite a lot and is the cause of many of the greatest intelligence failures that they talk about, is not enough data sharing. And this is becoming more and more of a problem because there are there's more and more private contracting. So there's more dispersion of the work being done in the intelligence community, and each of those groups feels some ownership of their data and wants to control it and do what they want with it and control who can access it, and ideally not let many, many people access it. So they don't share data with other agencies, they don't share data with other companies, which makes it harder for them to actually use the data for any of their objectives. So I think it's really these two challenges that are the biggest challenges of the intelligence community. They're collecting all this data, but they don't know how to go through it, and they don't even want to share it so that other people can help them go through it and might be able to use it for something useful. So it's almost pointless collection most of the time. And these are actually a lot of the same challenges that I face collecting data on the intelligence community. So it's interesting to try to think of solutions to them.
It's also obviously the case that the response to the Snowden revelations has caused some discomfort in the intelligence community. One of the more interesting restrictions on what one of the more interesting reactions in terms of GCHQ's reaction are the legal challenges that have happened in the UK to surveillance, not necessarily because those legal challenges have won any great battles on their own, but because they've extracted a lot of information from the agency, sort of like working like a sort of super-powered freedom of information request. And through devices like that, whole new GCHQ capabilities have been put on the record for the first time. Just a couple of weeks ago, Privacy International released 1,000 pages of GCHQ and UK intelligence agency documents relating to bulk personal data sets, which are these massive databases which include data pretty much on everyone in the UK. So things like passport databases and travel databases, which the British government has only recently admitted that GCHQ has access to. So this is one of the documents just released by Privacy International, which they got from, via the Investigatory Powers Tribunal. And it's talking about the pressures, like from the UK intelligence community talking to itself, that they're feeling about this dynamic. And they're talking about, at the very least, we'd expect increased and significant public interest and debate, which is something they don't like. This is kind of interesting because this is, again, is them giving a pep talk to themselves. So in this context, in the context of new information coming forward, they say we need to be exemplary in the way we operate our existing processes for bulk personal data, for these massive data sets. And this is really very interesting in the context of other documents in this cache. This is a newsletter sent out to MI6 analysts in September 2011, which is giving a list of do's and don'ts and reminding people of the rules for operating these databases, reminding people that you shouldn't be using this massive database of everyone in the UK to look up your addresses in order to send birthday cards. You shouldn't be using it to check your own passport details to arrange your personal travel. And you shouldn't be using it to check data of your family members. They sent another reminder out about this post-Snowden back in 2014. An example of an inappropriate self-search, surfing yourself, would be to use the database of all, travel, which is taken at, whenever you show your passport at an airport or a port, those records. An example of an inappropriate self-search would be to use the database to remind yourself where you've traveled so you can update your own records. Instead, they suggest that people from MI6 should be either checking the stamps in their passport or keeping a running record of where they've been to fill in their travel documents. It's kind of amazing. So bringing that kind of thing out is, from the Spook's point of view, clearly a challenge that they're facing post-Snowden. Another interesting challenge is, partly due to some of the things that we're describing, and maybe, people not wanting to fall into this kind of activity, is the other challenges that the agencies are having in hiring new people. Is it my one there?
And there are, I think, two sides to this challenge. The first side is people not wanting to work for the intelligence community, and the second one is that the security restrictions have gone so far up after Snowden and Manning that it's hard for them to get the people that they need to work for them because they won't be cleared.
So in the UK, it's been reported that GCHQ, which is one of the few bits of the British government which is actually hiring at the moment and is having increased funding because it's austerity for everyone else apart from the intel agencies. Even though GCHQ has, has less money problems than the rest of the UK government, they're having issues with meeting their recruitment targets. Entertainingly, they launched sort of a guerrilla ad campaign on the streets of Shoreditch, East London, which is like the hipster bit of East London, and are now in trouble for Hackney Council because with the local council because they didn't ask for permission first, amusingly.
So I've heard a lot of people in the intelligence community talk about this concept of hiring the unhirables and how they want to hire these people that they can't hire for some reason, that won't be able to get clearance, and they want to figure out how to find them, how to convince them to work for them, and how to get them clearance. Which leads to people asking interesting questions. And I actually have an audio clip where someone captures this problem very well. Is there a way to make the audio a bit louder? I'll just try it and see.
We want to hire people who are creative, who think outside the box, who think like hackers, and who are anti-authoritarian, as you might say. How do we solve the Manning-Snowden problem, which is both as an employer not wanting to hire the next Manning-Snowden, but as an employee not wanting to be perceived as that, but still have that same kind of creativity? I see it as a real problem that we're locking everybody down. We're afraid to hire anybody who doesn't have an absolute clearance, an absolute perfect record, because we're afraid they're going to be the next Manning and Snowden without looking at the fact that both of those have security clearances.
So ultimately, the conclusion that they came to in that discussion was that they couldn't avoid hiring the next Manning and Snowden. That they would, if they were trying to hire good people to do work, they could either just not hire the people they needed to do work, or they could try to figure out ways to mitigate damage because they weren't going to be able to avoid it. Which, even though I think a lot of the response to some of the Snowden revelations hasn't been at the level that it needs to be, it gives us some hope for viable counter-strategies. Because I think that there are some things that we can focus on doing to actually have a viable response to surveillance. One of which is continuing to do things that the intelligence community knows that they can't prevent, which is releasing and getting documents like those documents that Privacy International got, as well as whistleblowing and getting documents and releasing those. And the second way, I think, is to continue collecting data on the intelligence community and using their own strategies against them. But specifically in doing that, trying to find ways to avoid the pitfalls, the two major pitfalls that the intelligence community comes across themselves. That's having too much data and not knowing how to use it, and not sharing data. So we need to find ways to continue getting more data out there, but also to figure out how to use it effectively and how to collaborate with other groups more openly and more effectively in using that data.
And another thing we can do, to go back to the note on which we started this presentation, is that where we can see the methodologies and where they're being exposed, where documents have been released, and they don't make sense because the engagement factors that the UK counter-terrorism strategy used to explain what makes people fall into terrorism, as we tried to demonstrate, it could just as easily be shown to be, shown as like the factors which could lead people to fall into working for GCHQ or the NSA. Where the methodology doesn't make sense, satirize it, make fun of it.
And there's our contact information if you want to.
There you go.
Just